Okay, so we are going to now bring on Or and Flynn.
Our final speakers of the day.
And Flynn is probably, other than Danielle and I, probably the second most active person on Cube Crash. All of them except for possibly the first one, I think. So this is your eighth then, which is spectacular. Thank you so much for being.
I might go with terrifying instead of spectacular, but thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes, of course. Great to have you back. So we're going to duck out since we are running behind schedule a little bit, and we'll let you and Or take it from here.
Cool.
Amazing.
Yeah. We actually do have slides to go up.
Yeah.
So hopefully those will appear in a moment. Yes. Excellent. There we go.
Cool.
And this will be particularly fun because when we did the dry run, Or was the one presenting, but today I have to be the one presenting. So, Or, you want to go ahead and kick it off?
Yeah. So, hey there, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us. I know we're the final session, standing between you and the end of Cube Crush. So we're gonna make it as fun as we can. So next slide. Yeah, thanks. Or Navon, I'm a senior DevOps engineer at Honeybook. I'm also the co-lead of Friends of Dorothy, which is a CNCF community empowering LGBTQ plus professionals in the CNCF ecosystem. We support them and empower them to do amazing things like presenting at KubeCon or on contributing to open source. And I'm also a freshly new public speaker and a Cubestronaut. Today, I'm joined here by Flynn from Buoyant, and please introduce yourself.
I am a technical evangelist for Linkerd. My job is kind of figuring out how things service mesh related work and then teaching them to people. But I am also a co-chair of the CNCF's AI Gateway Working Group and heavily involved with Gateway API and lots of other things, which, yeah, I've been doing this for a long time. So with that, let's move on.
So today we're going to talk about using AI to rapidly build a completely new kind of interactive activity for one of the latest after parties in the last KubeCon EU. Many of you might have actually played the escape room at the Buoyant kidnapping party during the last KubeCon. So Flynn, wanna present your project?
Oh, I see Sophia in chat. Yeah, we ran all this on SIBO clusters. This is kind of what it looked like. It was completely custom. We wanted to tailor it into Amsterdam, so we set it up with this narrative of everything is happening kind of in the canals under Amsterdam, which don't really exist. Don't tell anybody. And so we ended up doing this sort of thing. We also had kind of a fascinating time because we didn't have everything fully greenlit until about 6 weeks ahead of KubeCon, which was not nearly enough time for me to do all of this by hand on my own.
Tight schedule. So to set the stage for everyone, how did you actually start the escape room initiative? What was the initial spark for that?
We thought it would be fun. We wanted to do something that was a little bit different. We wanted to get people together, do something that was fun, but also something that we made, we could set things up so you had to learn something about Linkerd in the process, which is often a challenge, right? We came up with the idea of an escape room really early on. Sophia, we'll put a link to the song in the chat. We came up with the idea really early on, and then we ended up starting actually by coming up with the narrative and letting that drive a bunch of decisions about how we were going to do things, which actually gets back to some of the stuff that Adriana was talking about in the early one about human oversight, which we are going to talk about a great deal. But like I said, we had very little time to do all of this. So it was about 99% of the code at this point was written by a lot of AI agents that were working in parallel under my direction and under my oversight, which I have taken to calling Wrangling Shoggoths because of an old meme.
So why Shoggoths?
This is from I think December of 2022 or 2023. The idea of a shoggoth, it's a thing that was invented by H.P. Lovecraft back in the 30s, usually described as this amorphous blob that can extrude tentacles and eyes and be whatever shape it needs. And um, they are always presented as being things that humans cannot understand. And if you look too hard at them, you will go insane, even though they can do amazing things. And if you kind of look at the way the LLMs we work with these days work, they're non-deterministic, they're unpredictable, they can do amazing things, they can do lots of different amazing things, and they can get you into enormous amounts of trouble. And even more interesting, this meme came about to try to explain the way we would go through and we'd train these things, and then they would go through additional rounds of feedback where they were trying, people would basically train them to try to act more like humans, even though they're not humans. So I really, really like this meme for the way it reinforces the fact that we are working with these tools that are fundamentally not humans, but we humans are really scarily good at anthropomorphizing things.
Mm-hmm.
And so remembering that they're not human can be tricky and dangerous.
Yeah, I agree. So once you started building using those shoggoths, you had, as you said, a lot to orchestrate. The narrative, all of the different stages and how they work together, all of this connected to Linkerd. Which specific tools did you rely on to manage all of this demand and all of the system running?
We used Gemini for images a couple of times, although at this point, most of the images assets in there were done by a human. We found that worked out better. The code was almost entirely Claude Sonnet 4.5, mostly orchestrated using GitHub agents, mostly. Those are the ones that I leaned the most heavily on, certainly.
And having those tools is one thing, but making them operate smoothly is another. How did you actually use those tools to make your work them work reliably for you?
Looking back over it, there were a couple of things that I think ended up being really, really important in this. It's always fun to look at software because you kind of have to do it forwards, but then you can only understand how things worked looking backwards. So this is always a fun exercise, right? The first thing, though, was we found that it was really important to start with the human experience, where we're building an escape room. This is a thing that humans will be going and playing. Humans are going to interact with it. And escape rooms have puzzles and they have challenges, but in my mind, the thing that really differentiates an escape room from just a puzzle game is the narrative running through the whole thing. So for us, it seemed really important to start with, set up a narrative. Like what's the player going to be doing? Why are they going to care? What are they interacting with? And we got to the idea of an escape room pretty quickly. And then we got to the idea that we wanted an antagonist pretty quickly. And then we ended up eventually ending up with this idea that, we want it to be associating with this with Amsterdam. Amsterdam has canals. I know we can have our villain kidnap a bunch of CNCF mascots and throw them in the canals, and the player is trying to prevent them from drowning, which people seemed to engage with that. That was kind of cool. But there were a ton of things in there where having the narrative as an overall guide was really important. And there were a bunch of places where I would do things like say, hey, go and solve this particular problem. And then I would go through and actually play the game with the fix that the Shoggoths had just put in and realize that just doesn't work. And I'd have to go back and approach it a different way so that the human experience was something that would actually work out okay. So that ended up being the first one was, okay, we're using these tools. We are using these non-humans to produce code for us. But at the end of the day, the human experience is the important bit. This may sound kind of game specific, but it's really not. I've spent a lot of time in the CNCF trying to express to people that you should always be starting in technology with how it will affect your human users, whether we call that the user experience or UX or DevX or whatever. It's kind of immaterial. You start with how it's going to affect the humans and you go from there. You don't start with the technology. That rarely ends well.
I agree.
This actually, in some ways, talks directly to some points that, again, that Adriana was making. What we found was that there were things the shoggoths could be really good at, and there were other things the shoggoths were not really good at. So figuring out how to play to the strengths of the things that were doing a particular bit of work was really important. A fun example of this is you just saw in the video that part of this happens in a 3D maze. Okay, there are a couple of things before that that happen in a 2D world. And so when I got to the point of telling the shoggoths, I think it would be good to do a maze in here. Let's do a 3D maze. They first spent a really long time trying to do that with two-dimensional transforms, and it did not occur to them that maybe they should just pull in 3.js and do it as a proper 3D render until I suggested it. So I ran into a lot of situations where they were not good at taking a more, like up leveling and looking at a more general view of the problem statement. They really, really wanted to focus on this one specific little thing.
Yeah.
When I had 4 or 5 of them all working in parallel, I had to be really careful about what I asked them to do, or they would step all over each other and land in merge conflict hell instantly, Yeah. So there were an enormous number of places where they could write a bunch of code, but having the human oversight was a critical part of making it actually work well.
I think that's like a critical part that people should understand. Like the human in the loop here is critical.
Not optional.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, if you look back at the human experience, I would not want to ask a non-human to make judgment calls about the human experience, right? I want that in the hands of a human. The shoggoths are like Sonnet 4.5 is way better at JavaScript and CSS than I am. I'm not sure it's better at Go than I am, but it's much, much faster. And that speed by itself makes certain things possible. But that does not mean that they were doing a good job of making architectural decisions or figuring out how to do work in parallel or things like that. And like I said earlier, we found that most of the graphic assets ended up being things that we needed to get a human involved with just to make them all really come together smoothly.
Yeah, I think that hallucination point that you can't really control unless you go like really, really, really specific, and even then you can't really control it, is something that human in the loop can actually solve. So with that saying, building interactive systems, they are always introduce unpredictable behaviors like we just talked about. What were the biggest risks that you stumbled into during the development process of the escape room?
There were a couple. Actually, let me come back to that and mention the third critical thing, which kind of deals with that. The third thing that we found was really important was needing a human to own the whole thing, both in the sense of managing work, but also in the sense that it's very important to recognize that at the end of the day, the human has to deliver this project, right? So for me to show up on game day and say, it's not working because the shoggoths, couldn't help me out here or something, would not have been acceptable. And so honestly, the thing that was the scariest about the whole process was about 4 weeks into this, GitHub had an outage, and So there was a fairly brief period where I was going like, oh yeah, hey agent, go do this thing, and nothing happened. And it was really fascinating to sit back and kind of go, okay, how am I going to deliver this if this outage lasts for a couple of days? And I actually, seriously thought about that because I didn't know what was going to happen. And that was the scariest thing that happened in there because I would have had to cut a bunch of scope and it would have been weird. It would not have been a pleasant thing at all. As far as risks, early on, there were a bunch of places where I would be running things on my laptop as I was getting a feel for what the agents. So running on my laptop, in this case for me, was largely using Copilot in VS Code because I was already editing in VS Code, and so that was a quicker path than firing up something like Goose. I did briefly try Claude's CLI, and I found it much less pleasant to use than VS Code's Copilot extension. That was a little bit interesting. I might go back and try that again.
Oh,
but
pretty nice.
Say again?
I say try Cursor. It's like I think it's a combination between the two.
Yeah, it's. I didn't feel like downloading a new, like an entirely new editor, and it's an enormous amount of what I did was very much driven by looking at the calendar and going 6 weeks. Okay, but where I was going with that was while I was getting a feel for what the shoggoths were good at and what the shoggoths were not good at, a lot of that was me typing into interactive things in VS Code.
Yeah.
When you do that, yes, VS Code tries to put in some guardrails and say things like, oh, hey, this is trying to write to a file. Should I allow that? But ultimately, I have this shoggoth, which is a non-human autonomous thing. It is running code on my laptop, and it is pretending to be me.
Yeah.
That breaks a huge amount of the protections that we have in place in, the Unix operating system, for example. So would it have been a better plan in terms of mitigating risk? Would it have been a better plan to set up, some completely external agent that runs either in a sandbox or at least as a different Unix user? Yeah, absolutely. I didn't really have time to go and explore that when I was doing this. So instead, I did what I had an option to, and I was careful with it. But using GitHub's agents actually changes that risk profile pretty dramatically because at that point, it's running on GitHub's hardware. It's not running on my hardware. And all it really has access to is stuff that I've already committed. So I already have it cloned on my machine in case they do something completely insane. And I've got a version control system backing it up. That made it possible to go through and meaningfully run multiple parallel work streams. So that model of, even if your sandbox is a GitHub environment, running the stuff in a sandbox fundamentally changes the risk of doing these things. It's a big deal.
Yeah, it doesn't have your identity anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And, to Boris's point about in the previous talk about delegated identity, there's so much of what we do in the ecosystem as a whole that has a problem in that as soon as you have a non-human agent pretending to be a human, that's really bad, and it breaks a lot of the reasoning that we've put in place around this one. So shifting the world over to delegated auth is going to be really important. It's also really annoying in a lot of ways. So that'll be interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I think some of the talks here today talked about exactly about that. It was very interesting to see what people think about it. Now, stepping back from the immediate implementation, I want to look a bit at the bigger picture as this kind of rapid AI system development becomes the norm. What should we be thinking about the long-term game? Like, what are the major industry impacts or potential issues that you foresee?
So there are a lot of people talking about AI slop and talking about the ability of, sorry, let me back up a moment. To me, The shoggoths are force multipliers. They're accelerators. The fact that I can sit down and write out a goal in English and then let one of them go and crank through the code really quickly is very helpful in a lot of situations, as long as you're careful about it. The fact that they can do things that I'm perfectly capable of doing, but they can do them much faster than I can, again, changes the nature of some of these problem-solving exercises, right?
Mm-hmm.
As one of my motorcycle instructors said, there is no such thing as too much power. There is only too little control. So that's a big worry that I run across. Figuring out how to both take advantage of the force multiplier while also retaining the control that we need is a thing that we are working on a lot, right? There's a lot of discussion about that. That's going to be a big deal. Some of the things that we hear about that are AI slop coming into projects. Some of that is just, there's already been one case where somebody got their GitHub account suspended because they went through and opened like 500 PRs across 100 projects over the course of a weekend, or I'm probably getting the numbers wrong, but things like that are interesting where it would not have been possible to do that a few years ago. Now it is, and we have to think about how we want to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
The most interesting problem to me, though, is one that I've also heard mentioned a couple of times through here, which is that there is a lot of stuff that I did in terms of managing the work the shoggoths were doing that I was basing on my experience as a developer. And I have done development for a really long time. I started in 1983. So the question to me then becomes, all right, where's the next crop of juniors coming from? Because there are a lot of places where you can go through and you can ask the shoggoths to write code and it will write some code that functions, but it's not good code. And so figuring out how we can give people the experience that they need to identify things that are good code, things that are not good code, looking at something and understanding, oh, this works for the particular problem, but if somebody comes in and wants to add this feature down the road, then we're setting them up for failure. There are a lot of things like that that are disconcerting to me in terms of thinking about how that's going to play out if everybody just starts using the tools to write all their code for them. I'm not really sure how that's going to play out. That's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, how do we fill this gap of knowledge for those people who can deliver, sometimes good solutions and sometimes, not exactly the right way solutions, while they have those superpowers. That's an issue that I think many companies are going to face.
Yeah. I should also point out, you hear about companies who are saying things like, oh, we're going to look at the number of AI tokens you burn and you should be doing all this stuff with AI. I also think that's a bad idea. The best way I've heard of approaching this stuff in terms of using it as a developer, right now, is very much to treat it as a tool, but to look at the human as being responsible for anything they submit, irrespective of what tools they used to create it. So if I go through and if I were to go through and write, use one of the AI tools to create a PR into Linkerd and then somehow get that merged, then the Linkerd folks would be coming over to me if something breaks about that later. They're not going to go back to the AI because the AI cannot own the code. We, as a society, don't have any provision for non-humans to accept responsibility or ownership. It's just not a thing built into our societies. That's not a technical problem. That's a societal problem. We're not going to solve that at a technical level. So that, I think, is one of the big things to be aware of for sure. And that also leads us back into, like the bit with, I couldn't exactly show up and go, the escape room isn't working because GitHub went down. That's not okay. Likewise, the escape room isn't working because my shoggoth broke something. No, you can't do that. Ultimately, I still own the thing and I am responsible for it. And in much the same way, that also implies that we really do need to figure out ways that we can build good junior engineers so that we can build them into good senior engineers so that we can continue providing the kind of oversight that we need to, even as the tools become more popular.
Yeah, keep taking this ownership. Totally agree. And I think that was like a perfect note to end on. It's this issue that hopefully as humanity will be able to solve.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to go take a look at the escape room, then you can scan the hideous QR code, or you can go to, actually, I'll just type this in the chat. If I can type, that would help. If you go to buoyant.io/escape room, then you can try it on your own clusters. Or if you want to, you can set up a couple of different clusters and you can set up competitions with your friends. If you do, I would love to hear how it goes for you. I'm still not entirely convinced that I didn't make some of it way too hard. So that would be fun to know about. Yeah, absolutely. And Or, actually, you were, I don't know if we have the URL, but when we were at the party in Amsterdam, then you were also spending some time setting up stuff in the Merge Forward room, right?
True. I created a mingling app in the library room in the KubeCon party, and around 70 people played it. It was in groups of 7 people.
Cool.
It went pretty good. You know, some Kubernetes riddles, some puzzles, and yeah. So thanks a lot, Flynn. For building.
Thank you.
Some experience. Yeah.
And yeah, thanks to the Kube Crash people. Wow, I can speak English. Really, I can.
It's the end of the day.
Yeah, thank you, Danielle and Lisa Marie. It's always a pleasure to be here.
It's so great. It's like, and on your demo on your website, do you have all the cool music that you had in Amsterdam?
Okay, let me put it this way. If we don't have it set up, we will make sure that it's there.
Okay.
Well, and I know Catherine shared the link to the YouTube soundtrack, so we have that.
Yeah, and you can also go to, if you go to savefippy.com, that will get you to the page that had everything about the party and the original pitch. And I'm pretty sure we have the soundtrack on that one already.
Okay.
So,
very cool. Now, I can't remember if I asked you this. So Argy is very new to Fippy and Friends. One of my contributions to the Argo project.
Oh, congratulations.
So
we deliberately did not use Argy.
Okay. Argy.
And there was a reason for that. The reason was, part of the narrative is that the unknown controller, the villain, is grabbing these mascots and throwing them into the canals to drown. And Argy can swim.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So,
absolutely.
Yes. Argy was part of the party, as Catherine pointed out. And there was another part of the narrative very, very early on that if you went through to sign up for the party before it actually happened, you had to solve a little challenge to get registered. And part of that included Linky getting thrown into the canals, swimming away, and having the unknown controller go, "What? I didn't know lobsters were aquatic." So we couldn't use Argy, actually.
That is so well, and it's funny because so Argo, as we call everything that's not the CNCF Fippy friend, which got renamed to Argy, they had rules about not being able to call it the project name, but we've always referred to this guy as Argo, and people always think that that's like a scuba mask, and we're like, no, this is so that he can go into space because he can swim and hold his breath underwater. Like, he doesn't need the thing underwater. That's so he can go into space.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Argonauts out there. Well, Argonauts knew that, but for everybody else, it's a big fan of the project.
Yeah, it also meant we couldn't use like Istio's dolphin. Couldn't use them either.
True.
I don't remember the dolphin's name, although the Istio folks will hate me for it, I'm sure.
No, I don't either. And this is why I lobbied to make sure that Argo had a name that you could tell what the project was. Like Linky, it's Linker D. I mean, at CD,
well, originally
I didn't know that was Z, and all of the other Goldie, you know, is Go, but the rest of them, I didn't. Did you know Fippy was PHP? Like who?
I knew that, but only because I had looked it up some time ago.
Yeah.
I think when I first ran across the mascots, it was like Fippy.
It's like what? Like the helm thing, the
All
hedgehog
right.
thing.
I'm jumping in. I'm like, all right.
We can talk about mascots all day
Thank
long.
you both for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks.